There is a particular kind of silence that doesn't sound like quiet. It sounds like a dinner table where everyone is present, but no one is there. It sounds like a bedroom door closing softly because something inside you already learned, very early, that your feelings were too loud for the room you were born into. You remember it, don't you? Not always as a specific memory. Sometimes it lives in your body instead. A tightness in your chest when someone asks how you're doing. A strange guilt that rises whenever you take up space. A voice, quiet but persistent, that whispers, "You're too much. You're not enough." Either way, you are wrong for existing the way you exist. If that resonates with you, stay with me. Because what you're about to hear may be the first time someone has ever put words to something you've carried your entire life without a name for it. You were not neglected in the way the world usually imagines neglect. There were no obvious wounds, no dramatic scenes to point to. You were fed, you were clothed, you were kept safe in the physical sense of the word, and so you grew up confused because something was missing, something fundamental, and yet you had no language for what it was. What was missing was being seen, not looked at, not managed, not corrected or praised for performance or tolerated during the good moments. Seen, witnessed, known, in the deep and tender way that every human soul requires to build a stable sense of self. And here is the paradox at the heart of everything we're going to explore today. The paradox that may have quietly shaped every relationship, every decision, every silent moment of self-doubt you've ever experienced. The child who was never truly seen becomes the adult who is terrified of being looked at. You spent years disappearing to feel safe, and now disappearing is the only thing that feels like home, even as it slowly empties you. That is not a flaw. That is not weakness. That is a survival strategy so sophisticated, so quietly brilliant, that it kept you intact through circumstances that should never have been yours to navigate alone. But survival strategies have expiration dates, and this one has been expired for a long time. Let's give this experience its proper name. Psychologists call it emotional neglect. And unlike physical neglect, it leaves no visible marks. It is defined not by what was done to you, but by what was consistently, chronically not done. The attunement that never came. The curiosity about your inner world that was never expressed. The parent who was physically present but emotionally somewhere else entirely. Dr. Jonas Webb, one of the foremost researchers on childhood emotional neglect, describes it as a parent's failure to respond enough to a child's emotional needs. And the devastating truth is this: it doesn't require cruelty. It doesn't require intention. It can happen in homes full of love, full of good people who simply never learned how to emotionally show up because they were never shown up for either. But the child does not know this. The child only knows the feeling. And that feeling, that chronic, unnamed sense of emotional absence, rewires the developing brain in ways that science is only beginning to fully understand. The first concept you need to understand is hypervigilance. When a child cannot rely on their caregiver to consistently meet their emotional needs, the nervous system adapts. It goes on permanent alert. It becomes a radar, scanning every room, reading every facial expression, anticipating every shift in atmosphere. Because safety was never guaranteed. It had to be detected. You didn't just learn to read a room. You learned to live in the reading of it. And you are probably still doing it right now. In your workplace, in your relationships, in every social interaction where part of you is always watching, always measuring, always preparing for the moment the emotional ground shifts beneath you. The second concept is avoidant attachment. Developed through the pioneering research of psychologist John Bowlby and later Mary Ainsworth, attachment theory tells us that a child who consistently receives insufficient emotional mirroring learns a devastating lesson. My needs are not safe to express. Closeness leads to disappointment. I am better off alone. And so they build walls, not out of coldness, but out of a profound, heartbreaking self-protection. They become the adults who crave deep connection and simultaneously sabotage it, who push people away right at the moment intimacy becomes real. The third concept is the emotional neglect schema, the invisible belief system constructed in childhood and carried invisibly into adulthood. This schema operates like a hidden operating system beneath your conscious thoughts. It tells you that your emotions are a burden, that needing things is shameful, that your inner world, your dreams, your grief, your joy, is simply not important enough to be shared. And so you minimize, you deflect. You say I'm fine so reflexively that sometimes you don't even notice how profoundly you are not fine. And beneath all three of these, beneath the hypervigilance, the avoidant patterns, the collapsed schema, is the nervous system itself, dysregulated at its core. Because a nervous system that never learned you are safe to feel becomes a nervous system that treats emotion like a threat. Your own feelings become the enemy, and you spend decades at war with yourself, without ever understanding why. Let us talk about what this costs. Not in dramatic terms, not in obvious breakdowns or visible suffering, but in the quiet, accumulating, invisible tax that emotional invisibility places on a human life. It costs you the ability to rest without guilt. Because somewhere in your nervous system, stillness was never safe. Stillness meant the absence of the performance, the goodness, the usefulness, the smallness that kept you acceptable. So you became someone who is always doing, always producing, always earning your right to exist through output. And when you finally stop, the anxiety floods in like water through a broken dam. It costs you your relationship with your own desires, because you were never truly asked what you wanted, not in the way that mattered. And so you stopped asking yourself. You became fluent in other people's needs and illiterate in your own. You know exactly what everyone in the room is feeling, and you cannot tell someone what you want for dinner without a wave of internal uncertainty washing over you. It costs you your grief, because you are grieving something that has no funeral. There is no ceremony for the childhood that should have been. No ritual for the version of you that never got to exist. The one who was allowed to be loud, to be needy, to be imperfect, to be real, without consequence. The Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung called this the shadow. The parts of ourselves we learned to hide so early and so completely that we eventually forgot they were there. The rage you were not allowed to feel. The sadness you learned to swallow. The joy you kept small so it wouldn't make others uncomfortable. These do not disappear. They go underground. And they emerge later, in your relationships, in your self-sabotage, in the inexplicable grief that sometimes visits you at 2 a.m. without a name or a reason. The German poet Rainer Maria Rilke wrote, "Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act just once with beauty and courage." The dragon here, the one you have been fleeing your entire life, is your own emotional truth. The full, unedited, inconvenient reality of who you are and what you feel and what you have been through. You were taught to fear it. You were taught not with words but with silence and absence and subtle correction, that your inner world was dangerous, too heavy, too much. But it was never too much. It was simply too much for them. And there is a profound, painful, and ultimately liberating difference between those two things. This is what psychologists call invisible grief, the mourning of experiences that were never named, never witnessed, never validated. It sits in the body as chronic tension. It lives in the mind as low-grade anxiety. It surfaces in relationships as a desperate, aching need to finally be known, coupled with the terrifying certainty that the moment someone gets close enough to really see you, they will find you lacking. That is not the truth. But it has felt like truth for so long that the difference has become difficult to find. Let's make this concrete. Because the child who was never truly seen does not stay a child. They grow. They adapt. They build a life, often a functional one, often an impressive one. And they carry all of it with them, quietly, into every corner of their adult existence. You might recognize yourself here. In relationships, you become the person who gives endlessly but struggles to receive, who is everyone's safe space but has no safe space of their own, who can hold someone else's pain with extraordinary tenderness but flinches when someone offers to hold yours. You cancel your needs so habitually that you've stopped noticing you have them. And when a relationship gets deep enough, when someone finally begins to see you, part of you panics. Part of you begins to pull away, to find fault, to create distance, because closeness was never safe. And love, real love, feels indistinguishable from the waiting to be abandoned. In your career, you became the high achiever who feels like a fraud, the one who works twice as hard for half the self-worth, who receives praise and immediately deflects it, not out of humility, but because something inside refuses to let it land. You confuse productivity with value and rest with failure. You say yes when you mean no because disappointing someone still triggers a fear response rooted in a childhood where your acceptability felt conditional. In your self-worth, there is a persistent, low-frequency voice that narrates your inadequacy. It doesn't always shout. It whispers. It creates a subtle filter through which all experience passes, one that amplifies criticism and dissolves compliments before they can reach you. This is not low confidence. This is the emotional neglect schema doing exactly what it was built to do, protecting you from the vulnerability of believing you matter, because the last time you believed that, and the evidence contradicted it. In your boundaries, or rather, their absence. You were never modeled what a boundary was. In the household of emotional invisibility, your feelings were the inconvenience. Your needs were the disruption. And so you learned that having limits was selfish, that saying no was dangerous. You became porous, open to everyone, protected by no one, including yourself. In your emotional regulation, you oscillate between complete shutdown and sudden overwhelm. Because a nervous system trained in hypervigilance has two modes, numb and flooded. You can go weeks feeling strangely disconnected from your own emotions. And then one small thing pierces the surface and everything rises at once, terrifying in its intensity, which only confirms your oldest belief. See? My feelings really are too much. In your internal identity, there is a quiet but devastating confusion about who you actually are. Beneath the roles, beneath the performance, beneath the version of yourself constructed to be acceptable. Because identity is built through being witnessed, through someone reflecting back to you. I see you. This part of you is real. This part of you matters. Without that mirror, you built a self. but it was built for others. And somewhere beneath it, the real you is still waiting to be introduced. Here is what you must understand. And this is perhaps the most important thing in this entire video. These are not personality flaws. These are coping strategies. And they were brilliant. They worked. They kept you functional in an environment that did not know how to hold you. But you are no longer in that environment. And the unlearning begins not with self-criticism, but with witnessing. The same witnessing you never received. You begin to offer it to yourself. You notice the pattern without judgment. You say, there it is again, the shrinking, the deflection, the self-erasure, and you do not condemn it. You get curious about it, because curiosity is the beginning of compassion, and compassion is the beginning of change. So, where do we go from here? Not toward perfection, not toward the erasure of everything that was shaped by your past. Healing, real healing, is not the elimination of your wounds. It is the integration of them. It is learning to carry what happened to you without being defined by it. And it begins with several practices that are not glamorous, but are profoundly real. And the first is inner child reparenting. This is the practice of consciously becoming the parent you needed, of speaking to the younger version of yourself, not with pity, but with presence, of telling that child, in whatever form feels true to you, I see you. I'm sorry no one was equipped to, but I am here now, and I am not leaving. This is not a metaphor. The nervous system responds to this. The brain, through its neuroplastic capacity, begins to build new relational templates, slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. The second is shadow work, the Jungian practice of retrieving the parts of yourself you learned to hide, the anger you suppressed, the joy you kept small, the grief you never allowed to surface. These parts are not your darkness, they are your wholeness, and integrating them through journaling, through therapy, and through honest self-confrontation is how you stop being at war with yourself. The third is nervous system regulation, because you cannot think your way out of a body-level survival response. Practices like breath work, somatic therapy, mindful movement, and intentional rest are not luxuries. For someone whose nervous system spent years in hypervigilance, they are medicine. They are the slow, patient process of teaching your body what your mind is only beginning to believe. You are safe now. You are allowed to be here. And the fourth, perhaps the most difficult of all, is the practice of choosing softness over survival, of noticing when you are armoring and asking yourself what it would look like to stay open, not recklessly, not without discernment, but with the quiet courage of someone who has decided that full aliveness matters more than perfect safety. The psychologist Bessel van der Kolk wrote, "Being traumatized means continuing to organize your life as if the trauma were still going on." The healing is in recognizing deeply, slowly, bodily, that it is not. You are not that child anymore, waiting to be seen in a room that did not know how to look. You are here. You are complex. You are capable of a depth of feeling and understanding that most people spend their entire lives searching for. The goal is not to be fixed. The goal is to become whole. And wholeness begins the moment you stop waiting for someone else to see you and start the sacred, difficult, beautiful work of seeing yourself. If this found you at the right moment, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to continue this journey, this channel exists for exactly that. For the ones who feel deeply, think quietly, and are ready, finally, to come home to themselves. See you in the next one.